Hello friends, myself Akshay Swami. I am from Asansol, West Bengal. In this module, I have picked some of the chapters from Herbert robot philosophy. First, we will be discussing about vital energy in its universal application. Second, our remedies, why they act. Third, it is about taking the case. Fourth, we will be discussing about analysis of the case. Fifth, we will be discussing about suppression. Sixth, we will be discussing about palliation, then temperament, and at last we will have some discussion on a very important concept called deflected current. So let's start our module by the first topic, that is vital energy in its universal application. The vital energy is that force which animates each individual. While the vital energy is in the individual, that individual is said to have life, to be, to exist. Even as the individual is derived from, becomes from the mating of two individuals, from the cells mating of which this vital force may be handed on with physical characteristics of the parents. So is the vital force itself derived from an infinite source, a storehouse of dynamic power, capable of developing and reproducing to an infinite degree in its manifestations. Yet each individual partaking in greater or less degree of general vital characteristics common to all. So we understand by this paragraph that the vital energy is present in all the living organisms or in all those who have life. The vital force in the individual becomes therefore the ego, that most intimate spark of the individual, which is in itself the essence of the individual. This is very much important to know what is the essence of the individual. According to our theories, we know that every individual is a unique individual and everyone has a particular essence that is not found in any other person. And this essence divides his individuality from all others, yet is his closest relationship to the universe. This closely relates him to all living creatures, yet he is identical with none. It is at once his tie to all energy, all vitality, all life, and at the same time his insulation against the massed power of the whole. As logic deals with the principles governing the comparative and constructive faculties in the pursuit and use of truth. So someone also defines logic as the science and art of reasoning. It is the search of truth. Let us apply this science to our theorem and reason this through to its natural conclusions. Without this vital force, there can be no life, no development, since there is no static condition in nature. Without a healthy normal development of the vital force, we find a state of decay and death. As homeopathic philosophers, we do not concern ourselves at this time with the sociological aspects of this problem. All the inferences from the foregoing statements may seem obvious. It is our duty to consider these primarily as they relate to the physical, mental, and spiritual well-being of our patients. We have observed in the study of the human race that life is perpetuated under certain favorable conditions of mating. It is true that physical characteristics are handed on from parents to offspring, but that the parents actually give life to the child, we may sometimes doubt. We may say with all assurance that under favorable circumstance, life is handed on from the parents to the child in more or less perfect vigor. Whence life comes, we cannot say, but that it gives vigor in greater or lesser degree to the individual according to the heredity environment, we cannot doubt. We know that heredity is 80% responsible for the individual and environment is 20% responsible. That life is continuous, we know to be true. There has been no age when all life has ceased. And we find this vital force, this energy, this dynamism passed on in all forms and degrees of living creatures. History shows us that life has thus been manifest for so many centuries that we come by deductive reasoning to comprehend that life is infinite. It is eternally going on and on. Where there is vital force, there is action, motion. Now, what is action? Action is one interpretation, one manifestation of vital force. If we have no motion, no action, no direction, without vital energy, it must be this energy which is responsible for all growth and all development in all spheres of existence. As we also know the fundamental law of energy, it is that energy can neither be created nor be destroyed. It just keeps on flowing from one form to another. So is with the vital force. Human beings, we know to exercise the right of choice, and herein is our province as physicians. For in making the choice, which is often a choice against natural laws, we find the vigor of the vital force abated and a retrograde action of the body, mind or spirit sets in. As we have pointed out before, vital force in its perfection means growth and development. This is very much important to know. Since there is no condition of standing still in nature, because nature is always in motion, every moment something is happening. In other words, his very existence is an expression of vital energy, but he is also expressed to the influence of the vital energy of others, and the interplay of vital energy and balance from many sources may imperil his own balance. The resultant lack of balance in his own vital energy is disorder that manifests in a train of symptoms of disease. Mathematics is the science which treats of the measuring of quantities and the ascertainment of their properties and relations. This is an exact science. It is a part of the study of astronomy among other natural studies, and it must be applicable in all spheres where any concept of measurement or relationship exists. Balance is a state of perfect relationship, the result of perfect computation, and the desired goal of all mathematics. We might say that mathematics in its highest form is the perfection of balance in its highest degree. Thus, we realize that the laws that apply to mathematics must be equally applicable to every condition where balance is a factor. Therefore, sometimes it's said that mathematics is the mother of all sciences. Lack of balance in the individual may be endangered by the interplay of forces resulting from his privilege of choice, from the interplay of forces engendered by others and over which he has little or no control, or by release of power of an infinitesimal amount of almost any substance, animal, vegetable or mineral, which has in itself the susceptibility of permeation or activation of vital energy. So this vital energy is present everywhere. Therefore, I would like to conclude that vital force is capable of three forms of action. It is motion, direction and balance. These manifestations of energy are an integral part of an exhibition of vital energy. Growth and development are directed motion, and in the degree of their perfection, we find the manifestation of balance. Next, I'll be talking about our remedies and why they act. In our thesis that homeopathy is fundamental, that is scientific, and that it is based on natural law, we have quoted findings from other branches of pure science that have been so uniform and constant as to definitely point the way toward underlying laws. These, to recapitulate briefly, were from astronomy, mathematics and biology, and have been compared with the closely similar findings of the action of drugs and their applications. First, in states of health to produce artificially conditions simulating disease, or second, to restore disease states to the normal balance of health. These substances capable of being raised by potentization, these are the medicinal substances I'm talking about, are derived from three kingdoms: mineral, vegetable and animal. And also we have the kingdoms like we have nosodes, sarcodes and imponderabilia, which are also sources of homeopathic drugs, and we potentize them. We cannot definitely say that the mineral substance in themselves possess vital energy, but they are fragments of that which composes the planet, Earth, and that planet either possesses some form of vital energy in itself or is susceptible to being activated by vital energy to such an extent that it performs its appointed movements according to the law. And we can use these minerals by proper preparation in the form of vital energy, not to perpetuate life, but to influence it on all three planes of body, mind, and spirit, that the vital energy of the individual may be thereby guarded against decay and death. So the objective is to prevent the body from decay and death. And we also recognize the presence of vital energy in vegetable growth, for it is evidenced in growth and development on the plant according to the natural law of development. We comprehend most easily the animation, the presence of vital energy in the animal kingdom. This implies a knowledge of drugs, not only their action, but their derivation, and this not in superficial terms. This deals with physics in a very definite way and in a much deeper, more constructive and significant way than we usually consider. In his little book, Science and the New Civilization, Millikan gives us some valuable hints in his chapter on available energy. His statement in chapter is that all knowledge that helps towards an understanding of the nature of the universe of which we are a part is useful, for we need very much more of it than we now have or shall have for centuries to come, to enable us to direct our energies towards wise, effective living instead of wasting them on beating tom-toms, inventing perpetual motion machines, or chasing either physical or social rainbows. Now let's take Einstein's equation and Aston's curve as a guide. There are no possible atomic transformations capable of yielding rays of the enormous penetrating power observed by us, except those corresponding to the building up or creation of the abundant elements like helium, oxygen, silicon, and iron out of hydrogen, or possibly in the case of the last two elements out of helium. We have arrived at pretty definite evidence that the observed cosmic rays are the signals broadcast throughout the heavens of the births of the common elements out of positive and negative electrons. Thus we find that in the birth of, say, two of our common earth elements, iron and silicon, we find tremendous powers liberated in the heavens. Now let's go to the history of one of the very important vegetable kingdom family, Lycopodiaceae. The history of Lycopodiaceae may be of still further interest in giving us the reason for its effectiveness. Among the all forms of life, those forms which have existed longest upon the earth, we find the mosses, and of these, this family is a hardy member. It is probably one of the oldest living forms of earthy plant life that is dependent both upon soil and water. It has persisted past all changes in circumstances and conditions, and probably has changed its form less to meet changing condition than almost any other form of life, except possibly by Equisetum, another of the early surviving forms. This tenacity of life adapting itself to circumstances without conforming bespeaks a tenacity of energy that, when released, must powerfully affect that which it touches. Equisetum hyemale contains silicon and magnesium. In analysis, the amount of silicon may run from 7.5% to 41.2%. If at their birth these elements register such tremendous energy as the cosmic wave reveal, what effectiveness must we expect when it has been assimilated, broken down, first in plant life and then by trituration and potentization even in minute doses? When animal, vegetable or mineral substances are potentized, they are rendered more potent because of the breaking up, disintegration of the atomic relationships that place them in a form where they act directly upon the dynamic force of the individual. That is, in their disintegration, their energy is liberated by releasing the radioactive power. Through the radioactivity exerting itself upon the vital energy of the individual, the potency is made effective. Thus, we are forced to recognize different forms of energy, the discharge of different energies or rays from what we have considered as inanimate metals and elements. We find that they respond energetically in much the same way as plants and animals. Not alone in their simple states do we find their response, but again and again as they are assimilated, broken down and rebuilt in different forms of life, from the simple assimilation and complicated rebuilding of the plant to the profound reaction on all living substances when they are in potentized form. So this is how our remedies work. Another topic of this module is taking the case, or how we are going to take the case. This is a very important topic, since case taking is the most important thing that a physician have to do every day and every moment of his life. Case taking have been described in Dr. Samuel Christian Frederick Hahnemann's Organon of Medicine in the paragraphs 83 to 104. In taking the case, the homeopathic physician has two objects in view. First, there is the object of diagnosis. This is to place a difficulty in a group class. The homeopathic physician can have no other object in making a diagnosis than to classify the symptoms under a group head, since the homeopathic physician never uses his diagnosis for therapeutic purpose. In this, it differs from the ordinary school of medicine, which uses the diagnosis as a guide to the desired therapy. Certain group conditions determined by the diagnosis determining the therapy to be applied. With the homeopathic physician, the group is never treated as a unit. The individual patient, into whatever diagnostic group he may fall, is treated as an individual, and the therapeutic measures are directed according to the individual symptoms. Therefore, the second and greater object in taking the case is to select the true symptoms of the patient and to clarify them, so that we can make a definite picture of the ills of the patient. In making the first prescription, this record is all important, and in the making of subsequent prescriptions and in reviewing the case, so that we may know the sequence of symptoms and the order of disappearance of the symptoms, we cannot move with any degree of assurance unless we have the record in accessible form. The attitude of the physician should be one of absolute rest and poise, with no preconceived ideas nor prejudice. He should be in a quiet listening attitude, and as the case is presented to him, he should have no previous impression as to what remedy the patient will require, because this of itself would bias his judgment. The first thing to note is the patient's name, age, sex, vocation, and if possible, avocation. Then we are often greatly helped by getting a record of the family, that is, the age of the parents, their general health, and cause of death if they are deceased. This applies to brothers and sisters also, and we must not neglect to get a picture of the types of ailments from which they have suffered. We often get a good picture of hereditary tendencies in this way. Find out if possible if there is or has been blood relationship between ancestors. Consanguinity plays an important part in hereditary tendencies as well as in making your prescriptions. Now we are ready to proceed with the record of the patient himself. Let us begin to record his past illnesses. What illnesses has he had? How about his recovery from each illness? Particularly, note whether he reports himself as fully recovering from illness, or whether he says he has not been well since any particular illness. Now ask the patient to tell you in his own words how he became ill and exactly how he feels. Do not offer any interruption, lest you break his thread of thought. As you record the symptoms, leave space between them so that you can fill in later answers to questions as it may be necessary. If he comes to a point where he seems to hesitate, simply ask, "What else?" Continue this system of interested listening until he seemingly has exhausted his story. Then, you're ready to review the case as it has been given to you. Perhaps, before we go into the next step, the questioning by the doctor, it will be well to state the things we must never do. We cannot place too much emphasis upon the absolute necessity of leaving these things undone. Number one is avoid all leading questions. By leading questions, I mean questions that suggest answers to the patient or suggest that you want to bring out certain answers. Some patients are desperately anxious to have answers suggested to them, and the physician must be constantly on his guard to avoid doing so. Second, never ask direct questions that may be answered with a direct affirmative or negative. Third, never ask alternating questions. Fourth, avoid questioning along the line of a remedy. Sometimes we may get a clue from the statement of a symptom that may suggest a certain remedy, and we must be very cautious not to allow this to prejudice us in favor of the remedy suggested by questioning the patient along this line, and thus perhaps bias the patient in his replies. Fifth, while you are dealing with one symptom, confine yourself to that symptom. Never skip from one symptom to another at random, as it confuses the patient and scatters the physician's ideas. Now, we will return to the necessity of rounding out the symptom picture in our record. Some symptoms may have been given with a fair degree of completeness, others are very incomplete. We must complete as far as possible every symptom that has been presented, and for this, careful questioning is necessary. Each symptom must be rounded out as to time and place, the sensation, the kind of distress, the type of pain, all of the modalities connected with it, the probable causation, that is what the patient thinks was the start of the trouble. Under the modalities, we must secure the aggravation and amelioration of each individual symptom so far as possible. Not the least important is the emotional reaction of the patient. When we work out the recording of the case in this way, we cover all parts of the man and can see the picture as a whole. We must leave nothing uncovered. In order to do this, we may have to bring into play the testimony of the family or nurse on symptoms or conditions that may have a bearing of considerable value. However, this source of information must always be scanned with a great deal of circumspection, and we must weigh the integrity of the source as being worthy of consideration. With the most careful recording and the most cautious questioning, we may be unable to find complete symptoms and may be unable to build up more than a sketch of the patient himself. We will deal with this in later modules. In acute illnesses, take the acute symptoms carefully, record each one, and find out all there is to know about them. Likewise, in the chronic picture, record all the symptoms as far back as you can dig out the symptoms and the sequence of the symptom pictures and prescribe for that state. However, if you are dealing with an acute condition, limit yourself to dealing with this acute state alone and do not at the same time attempt to dip into what has been a chronic state. Acute manifestations show themselves with surprising clearness, and to include chronic symptoms that have been manifest at other periods will but confuse the picture. Remember, we must prescribe for the totality of the symptom picture and not for any one symptom alone, but for the complete picture as it is presented in the individual. In an acute explosion, the chronic picture will retreat completely. Therefore, in treating the complete picture that is present, there will be no need to take the chronic picture into consideration. In considering the totality, we cannot overemphasize the necessity of getting the complete description of each symptom as to its location, character, sensation, modalities, and concomitants. The modalities, the aggravation and ameliorations are the most important. Next in order come the character of the sensations. The most important symptoms, of course, are the general symptoms that pertain to the patient as a whole. Then come the aggravations and ameliorations. The mental symptoms rank very highly for the reason that they point to the man himself, and they may be classed under the generals to a marked degree. The thorough examination of the patient from every possible angle should be carried through, not for the gross diagnostic symptoms important, as these may be from diagnostic and hygienic points of view. From the curative point of view, we should not fail to elicit all the possible clues that may lead us to remedy. Subjective and objective symptoms are to be elicited and recorded. Sometimes this will require the utmost ingenuity to elicit the necessary intelligent replies without leading questions. The physician's degree of success in obtaining the proper symptom picture lies in his skill and patience. We cannot rush these patients through. We must be good listeners. Get the patient to talking and tactfully keeping him talking about the symptoms rather than wandering far afield. Then cultivate your powers of listening and give your powers of observation full sway to form the complete picture of the little details and habits of a patient. It has been said that criminal lawyers should be medical men. It is eminently necessary, however, that homeopathic physicians be past masters of the art of cross-examination and observance of the patient's every movement and expression should be a matter of record. Before leaving the case, go over again the family history, the personal history, the mental and physical symptoms. Consider the temperament, the habits, the occupation, the personality of the patient. Ask yourself if you have skipped anything. See that you have questioned every item, every function. Question the modalities in particular. Go over the previous drug treatment and consider that. Remember that the nature and sensation of the symptoms, the time of day, the positions and circumstances under which symptoms appear are the most important modalities of any given case. To clarify these general instructions, let us take up the matter in greater detail and go together in the following requirements. In chronic work, it is necessary to take into consideration the general symptoms. By general symptoms, we mean those symptoms which pertain to the patient as a whole or to the complaint which brings to us. The aggravation, the periodicity, the seasonal aggravation, weather aggravation as to sun, wind, cold, dry, wet, fog, etc. Changes of weather as cold to warm or warm to cold, changes of weather as before, during or after storms such as thunderstorms, rain, snow, etc. The tendency to develop certain conditions such as the tendency to take cold, sore throats, headaches, etc. The reaction to fresh air such as cravings for or aggravation from. Reactions to positions in rest or in action such as aggravation by walking or amelioration lying with arms raised. These reactions in relation to position include also riding in trains, in cars, in vessels, conditions of appetite and the cravings or aversion of aggravations from certain foods. The effects of vaccination or serum treatment, reactions to bathing, effect of altitude, seashore or mountain, the amount of clothing required during the day and at night, the rapidity with which wounds heal, if the patient is subject to hemorrhages, the reaction of the patient to the presence of others, whether he prefers to be alone or in company, or whether aggravation being alone or in assembly, the sites affected. So these all are very much important. Again, the thermal reaction of the patient should also be noted. And a special note should be made of the aversions and cravings of the patient. So this was all about the points that we have to cover while we are taking the case. Then only we can form a good picture of case. Next, let's talk about analysis of the case. Now the question is, what is analysis? We have taken the case, but what is analysis? In analysis of the case, the value of symptoms must be taken into consideration on several points. So what we are doing here is we are giving value to the symptoms. The first point that is to be given importance is the personality, the individuality of the patient must stand out preeminently in the picture. This can be illustrated by linking the whole symptomatology to a complete picture of the whole individual, a whole personality. This embraces not only his physical characteristics but the expression of his mental and emotional characteristics as well. While the generals rank the highest in evaluating the case, and without generals we cannot expect to find the simillimum. The mental and emotional characteristics have a high value, since these are the true reflection of his personality, the man himself. Because the subjective symptoms are the registration of his physical or other difficulties as expressed upon his own personality. These are also of great value. The objective symptoms are less differentiative, yet their value lies in the fact that they cannot be distorted by the design of the patient. He little realized that he is manifesting these objective symptoms, and thereby they picture accurately certain phases of the case. There has been a great knowledge of diseases attained from investigators from the earliest times. Methods have been improved whereby diagnostic symptoms have been correlated, and all praise is due to these investigators along this line. The only difficulty is that diseases have come to be treated by name of the disease instead of by individual symptoms. The disease has been treated rather than the patient. It is only upon the totality of the symptoms that we can base our prescription, and so we require many individual symptoms as showing the characteristics and personality of the patient. The symptoms of location frequently furnish quite characteristic symptoms. and they deserve particular attention, since every remedy acts more and more decidedly on certain parts of the organism. The chief aim of the homeopathic physician consists in ascertaining the remedy that most completely and fully covers each individual case. In other words, the totality of the symptoms. We hear so much of the totality of the symptoms that sometimes it behaves us to stop and think what this means. The homeopathic physician may be likened to an artist painting a portrait. He fills in all those features pertaining to the likeness which is painting, and those features which may be found on all faces, eyes, ears, nose, mouth, lips. In this way, all individuals are similar, but each individual has peculiarities of his own, and in order to make the picture complete, the artist must present the individualities in the portrait, but not accentuate over and above the other features, the normal position, shape and size as it appears in the individual himself. It is in this relationship that we must gain a knowledge of the concomitant symptoms if we would prescribe homeopathically. In drawing the picture, we must present the rare, the striking, the peculiar symptoms which present themselves, not out of speaking, but associated with the other symptoms which form a background upon which the peculiar, rare and characteristic symptoms must be presented, as determining the individuality, the personality of the man. On the other hand, all the attendant symptoms should be carefully noted. What are these attendant symptoms? A. Those symptoms which rarely appear in connection with the leading disease and therefore are found rarely among the provings. B. Those which belong to another sphere of disease than the principal ailment. C. Those which have more or less characteristic signs of the medicine even though they have not before noticed in the present relationship or diagnostic group. In analyzing the case, very valuable symptoms are those pertaining to the aggravations and ameliorations, because the aggravations and amelioration are the natural modifiers of disease state and are the definite reaction of the man himself. We must take into consideration that every symptom of note has these modifying conditions of aggravations and amelioration as to time, the time of day, the time of season and the other details. While we cannot hope to cure a patient without strong general symptoms, yet conditions of aggravation or amelioration may in themselves become generals. If they appertain in the same way to several parts of the body, they then become conditions of the man as a whole, or general symptoms even though they seemingly express themselves in local parts. For instance, if headache is aggravated by motion, if the pain in the knee is aggravated by walking or stepping, if there is pain in the shoulder from raising the arm, then the aggravation from motion becomes a general as of the whole man, although it seemingly appears in dissociated parts. Now the question is that come into our mind are, what symptoms rank the highest in an analysis of the case? How do we rate generals or mentals and emotional symptoms, subjective symptoms, objective symptoms or concomitant symptoms? Where do we place much emphasis on objective symptoms and why? How much consideration should we place on the diagnosis of the case? Give an outline of the totality of a case. When may common symptoms attain a peculiar value? What do we mean by epidemic remedy and how can we determine the epidemic remedy? When may a particular symptom become a general? So these are some of the very important questions that we can understand during analyzing the case. So now let's talk something about suppression. What is suppression? While we were studying about the vital energy, we pointed out that it was this force which was the expression of life itself, and through its power of development and control in itself and by itself, it maintains the harmonious working, the state of equilibrium which is perfect health. There are external forces which may have an impression upon vital energy, yet that allow it to work in undisturbed harmony. Let us consider some of these external features that may thus suppress the normal functions of the vital force, and through the vital force the normal functioning of the body. Such conditions as shell shock, fright, fear, excessive joy, intense, unsatisfied longing for mate or offspring, unrequited love, grief from loss of family or friends, business apprehensions and worries, disappointed ambitions, extreme fatigue or exhaustion. All these forces have an influence upon the vital energy and so warp and suppress its natural functioning that a train of symptoms is produced, varying in their manifestations, but each varying widely from the natural expressions of the vital energy. We often see cases where these suppressing emotions not only affect profoundly the single individual, but extend their influence to the next generation through the effect on a nursing mother. The palliative effect of medicines in physiological form is a condition that we see over and over again, and we can observe the sequence of suppressive action, the results being the first palliation and then suppression or an actual aggravation of the first condition. These are always primary and secondary actions as a result of physiological dosage. The homeopathic physician is the only physician who is equipped to deal with these conditions, for his provings and the fundamental principle of his work is the proper coordination and normal functioning of the body, the mind and the spirit. Now let's talk something about palliation. What is the law of palliation? Physicians who have been somewhat trained along homeopathic lines manifest more confusion in the treatment of incurable diseases than in almost any other field of medicine. When faced with incurable cases, the thought occurs to a great many physicians to administer palliative measures in an effort to alleviate suffering and to attempt to hide from the patient and from the family the real seriousness of the situation. Although they may mean well, it is an effort expended in the wrong direction and does more harm than can well be estimated. There is no place in the field of medicine where obliteration of symptoms will cause so much confusion, so there is no possibility of accurate prescribing as in these incurable cases. For example, the insomnia may be treated with crude palliative measures so that the patient secures sleep. But at best, this is an unnatural sleep. While if the insomnia is considered as a part of his symptomatic picture and given its proper place in that symptomatology, and the man himself is treated, not alone one or two symptoms, he will gain his natural refreshing sleep and he himself will be improved in general health. Dr. Robert T. Morris made the following statement in 1893, and it is as true today as it was then. He said first that opium is a drug which stupefies the physician who gives it more than it does the patient who takes it. Second, a drug which greatly relieves the distress of the physician who without it would be compelled to do something rational for the relief of the patient who has put confidence in him. Pain in itself is but a part of symptom. However, the physician must take into consideration the location, the kind of pain, whether steady or intermittent, and if intermittent, whether at regular intervals or upon motion, or is it dull, cutting, blunt or sharp, pressing, pulling, darting or cramping. Get at the type of pain as a characteristic symptom of the disordered condition, the time and circumstances of aggravation and amelioration, the thermal reaction, and all other concomitant symptoms. When the symptoms of the pain itself is complete, with the location, type, and aggravation and ameliorations, your picture is almost complete. But if in addition you can find those concomitants, you have a sound basis for the selection of a remedy which will relieve the pain promptly, and the patient will be much more comfortable and happy in general than with any narcotics. Next, I would like to talk about cases of mechanical injuries where there is much pain and which would be subject to narcotic or sedative treatment under ordinary medicine. The homeopathic physician has a group of vulnerary remedies that will not only allay the pain and distress incident to traumatic conditions, but will prevent congestive, suppurative, or gangrenous processes, and actually will hasten healing. Whereas narcotics, while deadening the pain, invite structural changes by slowing the natural recuperative powers. In this class, we may mention such remedies as Arnica montana, Hypericum, Lidampal, Natrum sulph, Rustox, and Ruta, each of the highest usefulness when indicated. In incurable cases or seemingly incurable cases, we must not put a limitation on the possibility of the similar remedy. For in many seemingly incurable conditions, the simillimum will so completely meet the situation as to obliterate the symptomatology of disease and the pathology, and will restore the patient to health. Now, I'll talk about the deflected current. When you hear this word deflected current, then it arises curiosity that what is it, from where it came, and what is its use in homeopathy. First, I would like to start this discussion with Robert's philosophy of deflected current. We are told that light waves travel in a certain direction until they meet some obstacle. When they are deflected at an angle proportionate to the angle of interference, we are told that our remedies are curative in conditions closely similar to those produced by the remedy in a healthy human being. The science of optics can give us, with a very small percentage of error, the measurements of light waves, the angles of deflection, and the measurements necessary to correct vision or to utilize the light waves in some particular manner. In other words, there is a definite measurable approach through known laws to the application of light waves to our modern needs. And we may be assured that with a growth in our needs and a greater understanding of those laws and measurements, future generations will be able to utilize light waves to a far greater degree than is thought of at present time. The homeopathic laws are fundamental. We understand many of them. We utilize them. Unfortunately, we have no such instruments of precision by which we can measure the obstacles to the curative waves of our remedies. Therefore, we have no uniform results from our remedies such as we might expect from the vast armamentarium of remedies and the compilation of knowledge and experience garnered by successful homeopathic students since the time of Dr. Hahnemann. Some of our confreres will say at this point that such instruments of precision are being used by homeopathic physicians at the present time, that they are daily being perfected and that the results are increasingly satisfactory. No doubt. All of this is true. Yet for the average homeopathic student, we feel that such means are not yet available, or if available, the technique has not been sufficiently mastered by the average physician to be handled with accuracy, or perhaps the degree of perfection of such instruments interferes with capable usage. However, this may be. Our thesis has to do with the average homeopathic physician and may be reduced to that all too well known questions. Why are our results not uniformly satisfactory? That's the question. Why does not the seemingly indicated remedy always work? That's the question. Of course, there are the answers known to every physician of whatever school and some that only the homeopathic physician recognizes. One obvious reason is the pathological condition of the patient. The surgeon are more appropriate to know about such pathological obstacles than is the homeopathic physician. But they so lack the means to cure that their knowledge teaches them only to remove offending tissue. Perhaps patient's recovery by the aid of beneficent nature. It is trite but true that more mistakes are made by not looking than by not knowing. On the other hand, there are serious homeopathic students who have come to believe that treatment of pathological conditions by X-ray or radium dissipates rather than cures the pathological tissue. Then there are the states which arise from mechanical obstruction, non-pathological but the actual presence of a foreign body, which give rise to reflex symptom of exceedingly troublesome nature. Of course, the remedy does not and cannot cure such symptoms so long as the causative factor remains. Persistent ear aches or coryzas in children who have inserted small objects into the ear or nose have their counterpart in the suffering of adults, often from unusual minor accidents. Also, the psychic trauma, emotional stresses of varying degree and insistence are factors that we as the homeopathic prescribers should understand and weigh thoroughly in view of the patient's symptomatology. It was Dr. Hahnemann himself who emphasized this fact that nothing was so deleterious to health as unhappy domestic conditions, that these conditions could and often did prove insuperable obstacles to cure. It is fortunate that the simulacrum often can take the additional tension from the patient or may lift off one series of symptoms. In some cases, one must know the obstacles to cure if he is to be able to serve the patient with any degree of real assistance. Although it is one of the greatest boons of homeopathy that so many of our remedies have in themselves the power to antidote massive drugs and so release the vital power inherent in the patient himself with a corresponding response towards cure. One of our hardest problems is the patient who cannot seem to rally. The old chronic with a long but seemingly not overwhelming history and with a clear picture of remedy. Somewhere here there is an obstacle to cure, and we must plumb the history, physical, mental, emotional, to remove that obstacle or measure it, and to measure as well as our remedy and its potency to determine whether it is the simillimum in likeness of symptomatology and energy. At last, I would like to suggest that this deflected current is very much applicable in homeopathic principles and the homeopathic fundamental laws, and the physician should distinctly understand the following conditions in order to perform the operation of curing. First, what is curable in disease in general and in each individual case in particular. He should clearly comprehend what is curative in drugs in general and in each drug in particular. He should be governed by distinct regions in order to ensure recovery by adapting what is curative in medicine to what is recognized as undoubtedly morbid in a patient. Finally, when the physician knows in each case the obstacles in the way of recovery and how to remove them, he is prepared to act thoroughly and to the purpose as a true master of the art of healing. Thanks a lot for patient listening.